How did you become a priest? And can you please give a word to us men who are interested in becoming priests?
Oh, how did I become a priest? I don't know. It's a beautiful, it's a terrible. I mean, I don't mean, I mean it in a true, it's a terrible thing. To be a priest, it's beautiful, in some sense. I wouldn't change it. You love it, but you have to die. It's terrible. It's terrible. It's not a career. It's something you just bear, in a good way with Christ, because you're entering into that in some small way, because the priesthood is Christ's. And so, it's a fearful thing to be a priest. It's really a fearful thing. God help us. God help us. We're men, men who make mistakes. Hopefully we're upholding church teaching as best we can. But yeah, if you want to be a priest, then you have to be ready to suffer. Because you have to suffer with Christ. For your people. And for the world around you. And so, and then you have to love. And you have to try to love as best you can. And that's a hard thing. It's a hard thing. And there's so many temptations, There's so many temptations for priests to really pray for them. But if you're doing it, it's not a career. It's not a career. In fact, if you want a career, it's the worst career choice you could ever make in your whole life. So don't do that. It has to be life. And sometimes all you have is Christ. And you're stripped down to almost nothing, and left with only Christ. And you have to be ready for that. You have to be ready for that. You have to be ready to be rejected. You have to be ready to be persecuted. You have to be ready to love when people don't love you. You have to be ready to forgive when forgiveness is not given to you. You have to be ready to be slandered. You have to be ready to be spoken ill of. You have to be ready to be mocked. You have to be ready. All Christians do, but in some sense, in a more potent way, the priest has to. And that's a hard thing, and there's a temptation to shrink back from that. To shrink back from that as a priest. At least that's sometimes my temptation. But in Christ, there's life. There's life. And so you have to count the costs, to be a priest. I'm not a good priest, so I'm not speaking of myself, but we need good priests. We need good priests. We need priests that are going to stand for the gospel. Bishops that'll stand for the gospel. That'll love Christ, that'll love their flock, that'll go to die for their flock. Like Christ, the Good Shepherd. And not just, so God help us to do that. So God help us to do that. It's a sharing in the life what should be the Christian life, but it's just sharing in that life. It's an overwhelming thing, I would say, to be in there, to stand before the altar, and you struggle with the struggles. The priest struggles with every struggle of humanity, and in some sense, standing in front of the fire of the altar sometimes just, as it were, amplifies those things in your own heart. So that intense, sometimes internal, life is so we have to be ready for those things. You have to be ready for those things. You have to be. So how, I don't know. I think it's interesting. I think it was St. John Chrysostom speaking about marriage. He says, but it's beautiful. It's not. But he says, something to the effect that you're a young man. You're like with my wife. I was young. I thought she was beautiful. Like, oh, I must spend the rest of me. And you do. It's good, but you're kind of beautiful. And in that good, hopefully we use it in the right way as men, right? That desire in finding women beautiful, which we should. There's nothing wrong with that. It's using it correctly, right? It's not abusing it, right? Christianity is the right use of things. But he says, you kind of, there's that love and that, she's so beautiful. And you kind of brought it, but you don't quite understand until you get into it what it means to be married, And so you're kind of I would think same thing sometimes with monasticism. Maybe it's a true thing. You kind of you go to the monastery, like, oh, look at these monks. They're praying. They're doing this. It's so awesome. But when you talk about, wow, the real monastic struggle is intense. Struggle doesn't mean negative. There's a beauty of life. Life is, in that world, there's a struggle to it. And in marriage, there's that same thing. You get into marriage, you're like, wow, she's beautiful. I love her. All these things, but then you're like, oh wait, now I have to sacrifice for her. Now I have to do this for her. You know what I mean? Now wait, but then you find this whole dynamic that almost, you're kind of aware of, but you don't. You get into it. You go, oh wow. And then when you're able to, when you learn together, then it begins to work. But you get married almost. Not quite under, like what I know about being married now after 28 years almost of being married to my wife is, so drastically different than when I entered into it, right? I think being a priest, it's similar. You look and you have that desire. So you have a desire. I want to, just I think are good things. I want to serve God. But when you enter into it, so you enter into it kind of like marriage, because priesthood is, you kind of, you're bound to the altar. You're bound to Christ. But then the more you go in, the deeper you get, you realize, wow. So you're kind of, St. John says, you're kind of lured into marriage, not quite lured, I forgot exactly the word, but it's the fact you're like lured into marriage by like the beauty and the pleasure of your wife and their desire for her, which is a good thing rightly used. And in the priesthood, it's just something you're like, oh, look at that, serving, you have a good desire for that, but then you get in and you're like, wow, okay, but this is something so much deeper, this is something that is so much profound, and the more I'm a priest, the more, I don't know. I'm not trying to be overly dramatic or put on any kind of pretenses, but the more I'm a priest, the more I realize how unworthy I am to be a priest.